Okay, everybody, welcome to Contemporary Issues. That's my gavel. That's all I've got.
Thank you. It's so good.
We're going to talk this evening about religion for a new generation. What does the future hold for religious communities? And as we observed last week at the end of the conversation, religious communities everywhere at least in sort of North America, and Europe is probably 20 years ahead of us on this. But religious communities everywhere in North America, particularly white religious communities, are going through this huge transition where the generations that have been kind of the dominant drivers in the life of the religious community just aren't being replaced in the same numbers that they had prior to kind of these most recent couple of generational transitions. So we're going to talk tonight about millennials, and millennials are the generation just younger than me. So depending on how people count, sometimes I'm on the millennial side of the line, and sometimes I'm on the Generation X side of the line. Millennials these days are in the age range of about 25 to 40. Again, the lines are debatable a little bit on the top and bottom end of that. But that means that every single last millennial is a grown-up now. And those who went to college on the traditional timeline are out of college, every last one of them. We're going to hear about the ways that millennials are forming community, doing some of the same work that religious communities did for the generations that came before them. So the researchers that we're going to hear from are Casper Kuile and Angie Thurston. They both went to Harvard Divinity School, which is the same divinity school that I went to. So this is kind of how I tripped over them. We weren't there at the same time. They both went to Harvard Divinity School and probably couldn't have told you exactly why they were doing that at the time. HDS is not a traditional sort of denominational seminary. Not everybody going there is headed toward congregational ministry where I ended up. And so it was for sure the right place for them. But Casper is not a religious person, was not raised religious, ended up at a divinity school. Angie, if I understand right, was raised in a religious community, but had also kind of left her religious community, was not headed toward ordained ministry. But they had this sense, and they found this sense when they arrived among a lot of other millennials. HDS has a lot of traditional students who are, sort of going straight through, get out of college, go on to seminary, kind of students. And they said, there are a whole lot of people like us who don't know what tradition we're from, who don't know what religion we identify with. And yet here we all are. And so we're going to hear a presentation that they gave early in the pandemic. So they're newer at using Zoom April 2nd of 2020 than we are right now. They're going to talk about some of the trends that they're seeing in religion. And so they're seeing, as generations progressed, people are more and more disaffiliating from religious membership. So if somebody, if you ask somebody, what religion are you, or what religious community are you part of, they'll say, I'm not. But this is important. These folks are not atheist for the most part. Some are, obviously. But they're not predominantly overwhelmingly atheist. They are spiritual people who would not identify as religious. And so that's actually one of the terms that you've heard kicked around, the spiritual but not religious. But then as they dug into research and interviews and finding where are these folks finding community, what they identified was that what we're seeing here is a cultural trend that doesn't specifically trace to any particular sort of institutional failure. Although millennials can certainly tell you the way that baby boomers can tell you what's wrong with institutions. So they can certainly tell you what's wrong with institutions in very specific detail, depending on what their institutional experience has been. Casper and Angie also found a couple of really important sort of cultural crises that they identified. So they found a crisis of isolation and loneliness, that people are engaging in religious and spiritual practices, but they're doing them alone and operating kind of without a sense that they've got confidants and community that they can connect to. They also found, and this has, you probably see, a newspaper article a month at least on this, that Americans' psychological and physical health is declining. We are getting less healthy as time goes on. And that's important to this research because community identity is actually a big predictor of your psychological and even physical health. That if you're plugged into a community and you've got people that you can turn to and call on, then you are sort of by virtue of that becoming a healthier person. So these things are tied together. And what they said is that this is not about people rejecting tradition. So a lot of these people doing them completely by themselves, religious and spiritual practices, are deeply traditional, deeply tradition-rooted practices. They may look different, but you can tell if you understand the tradition, oh, I understand, where in the Roman Catholic tradition this comes from, where in the Presbyterian tradition this comes from, where in this particular Buddhist lineage this comes from. And so there's this yearning for tradition. And so Casper and Angie say it's not that that we're rejecting tradition, it is that the distribution systems for these traditions are becoming obsolete. The distribution systems are becoming obsolete. So we're going to give you a little bit longer to just listen to folks this evening than I've done with a couple of the more recent videos that I've excerpted for you. But I want to let Casper and Angie talk about what people are looking for and longing for, what they're doing with tradition, sort of what's the place of traditions in this, and then where are millennials going when they are looking for real connection, and sort of what are they doing that is that's actually, they're calling it, Casper and Angie are calling this religious activity, if you know what you're looking at, that they're doing in secular spaces. So these are not religious institutions, but you're gonna hear them describe the way these non-religious institutions look and act religious in the way that people engage with them. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to listen to Casper and Angie here. So I'm gonna stop them there. There is more good stuff in that presentation. But I want to give us the chance to talk a little bit about what we heard. What did you hear in Casper and Angie's presentation that particularly caught your ears? Bev, I see you talking.
Thank you. I was hesitating, Rainy. The community that formed from gathering at CrossFit, getting together, sharing meal, which I hate to say the 9 to 9 again, but, and plug maybe. So that just fascinated me, because usually most gyms you go in, everybody's on their own machine or doing their own whatever. And if they go the same time, they do meet friends. I mean, become friends perhaps, especially of the neighborhood ones, not the gargantuous ones as much. But it's very interesting, the things that we cling to of tradition. And these kids are looking, the younger generations are looking for that because they didn't feel good in our network. That close?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about what are the differences between Covenant and CrossFit or this dinner party. So what's different between, actually no, I'm gonna hang on to that question. We'll come back to that question because that's an important piece for me. But I want to hear what else y'all heard in there.
I heard people looking for ways to avoid traditional religiosity. I heard a lot of people saying I can get all of the spiritual comfort I need or whatever from one of those lists without actually thinking about my relationship to any kind of a God or the hereafter. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I'm saying I don't see how that's getting us toward melding them in with Christianity.
So the theology, sort of the implicit theology of these groups is not something that you would recognize as compatible
religious.
As religious. Okay.
Yeah. I was also thinking that you can find groups of people who get together and become close friends and perform all those functions for each other at a bridge club, on a softball team, certainly at the co-op, at the tables with the coffee and rolls on farmers' mornings, and we can come up with lots of others. That doesn't make them wrong, but I'm trying to just listen here but I'm not seeing a connection with us.
So the question I'll ask to that is, what are folks finding in these other settings that they're not finding in a setting that would otherwise look traditionally religious?
So my kids are 33 and 35, and neither chooses church as an option, and neither one of them has kids, so that may change when they have a family. But and they both grew up going to church every Sunday, but they use an app where you can, I can't remember what it's called, but you go on and people will say, we're going out for a beer at 6 o'clock at this place. You know, you can join whatever group you want just by emailing the people that post something. We're going kayaking at Gray's Lake. We're going, fishing, we're bowling, whatever. And when my daughter moved to Chicago, that's how she met her core group of friends, was through this app. And I wish I could remember the name. And they actually mention it in this talk a little later on. They mention it, and then I still can't remember it. I'm like, oh, what's it called? Anyway, they use that, and the reason they don't want to go to church is not because they don't believe in a higher being, not because they don't believe in what the Presbyterian Church believes, but just because they don't want to spend an hour doing that thing that we all sit silently and watch. Yeah, they don't do that. That's not how they learn. That's not how they want to spend their time. And they're very picky about what they choose to do. I don't know.
I can see that, Deb. I see that in some of my kids as well. And it's a show being put on without interaction or feeling or warmth and nothing in common. You know, they sit with the family and well, years and years ago, couldn't sit with their friends unless they were in class and went as a group. Interesting, Deb. Good. That was a nice point to bring up.
The speakers use the word authenticity to describe a piece of what folks are looking for. And they describe what the word authenticity means in that context in a kind of a particular way. They say authenticity is about, everything has to be not too perfect, not too sort of ready-made. It's all, it's all just so, but you have to be invited into co-creating whatever the thing is. Which is, I think, related to what I heard you saying, Bev. That it's not that sitting quietly is not necessarily something people are willing to do, right? But even sitting quietly, are you really involved in what's happening? Does this thing need you in order to happen?
A little different than what our traditional, as we know it, environments provide for us. There is no ownership to that place of caring and hugging and reaching out. And I mean, is that what you meant, Nathan? Ownership, because they're not able to be involved. It's
right,
all,
yeah. So what difference does it make whether they show up or not?
Right.
Yeah. And go ahead, Bob.
That's where I think, in terms of looking at covenant and a covenant in particular, but a church our size, is that the religious experience comes as much, maybe more, from the involvement, from what you do individually, but more as a group, in terms of expanding your religion or living your religion. But I can relate to, I would not agree with John's characterization of the secular groups, the CrossFitter. When they're talking about CrossFit, I'm thinking about my golf group. I'm thinking about my card group. I'm thinking about the guys together, and I'm thinking about when we get together as couples. And that is all a religious experience to me. It isn't that we sit and pray and do those outward things that we do in church, but it's that we band together as a group, and we care for each other, and we share each other's joys, and we share each other's griefs, and I think we're doing things that God asked us to do, and not outwardly, but that I would relate to the CrossFit experience, just in terms of some of the groups that that we're all involved with, different groups. Marlene's Mahjong group, So I think the younger people, the millennials, grew up differently than we did. Forget about the religious part of it. They were more independent earlier and to a much greater degree than we were. And that led them to do their own thing in many different ways. And now many of these people are religious. I've got two kids that don't go to church, two children. They're not kids, my God. 49 and 50 or 48 and 50. They don't go to church. But I think they're living, for the most part, a Christian life. And they do that because, in my mind, they believe in something greater than themselves. I've always maintained if you don't believe, you can't love yourself if you don't believe that there's something higher than you. I couldn't anyhow. That's where I get my faith is, or what my faith does for me is it gives me a relief in believing that there is an Almighty. And anyhow, enough.
I think,
That was good.
can I?
Go ahead, Jean.
I think that Bob is hitting on something, but it struck me is that what these young people are finding through their CrossFit, for their bowling, whatever, all those things, is community. And when we first joined Covenant, that was the thing that was so together with us. I think that COVID has kind of brought out the fact that we've lost that community, because as hard as we try right now to keep in touch or to do things, you're segregated, you can't get together. And when over the years, when we first joined Covenant, for example, and I think that's what, we had groups of different groups that did different things together, but we still had the church. But the thing that I think these young people are looking at is they get together and they're face to face, they do some things. And if you think about coming into the sanctuary and sitting quietly and not really interacting until the end, I think that's what they're missing, because they are interacting all the time. They pick up their phones and they're interacting on their phones and Instagram and all the rest of it. And then they decide they're going to get together on a Friday night, or they do this, that, and the other thing. And so that I wouldn't say they weren't religious, they're just religious in a different way. They express it in a different way.
So there's something face-to-face about certainly the two settings that Casper told us about, the way he described CrossFit, and just compare the way he described CrossFit to the way that your gym operates, what your workouts are like at your gym, compared to what he described about CrossFit, or the dinner party, which is, clearly you're sitting down at tables, and we know, we have this intuition that that is, as Jean said, kind of all the more kind of sharpened for us during the pandemic when we can't sit down and eat with people. But that practice of being face to face at a table. What's the difference between CrossFit and the gym that you perhaps go to, or the most recent gym that you've been in?
A year ago.
A year ago, yeah.
I don't find community. I don't see anybody that I know or like. Yeah, I don't talk to anybody. Nobody's talking to one another for the most part.
Yeah, what are they doing?
More like the Catholic
Just
Church.
grunting, yeah.
Grunting. And what sort of thing are they grunting with?
Well, they're lifting weights, you know, whatever.
Yeah, they're lifting weights, or they're on a treadmill, or they're using some machine thing. And what did they say CrossFit workouts are like?
Partners. They have partners that they do stuff with.
Everything you do is with a partner.
Yeah, that was
And it sounds like your partner is not just your spotter, right? But you really are, you and your partner both have to do your part for the workout to happen. And it's intentionally built that way.
That's what. Hello, the word CrossFit. I mean, there's
Right.
two people.
I'm not finding that. I mean, I go over to Mercy Health, and since we have started together, there is like I would say 10 of us that we see each other all the time. We share the swim lanes, we visit. I know so much about all these other people, and we figure when everything is better in the spring, we hope we're all gonna start doing lunch together. It's a big community. We all kind of know about everybody else. I got invited to, since St. Mark's is opening up on the 17th, and I got invited to that church service. I turned them down, Nate.
Thank you.
But still, it was like, okay, so there's this whole group that interacts, and it's not that this is all in water aerobics. We're not CrossFit people. So we don't have partners that way, but we do have partners in that we will share a lane and work out together. And
That's a woman
I
thing.
made some massive new friends, actually.
Jean, I think you're a millennial.
I'd love that, but I'm not sure.
That's kind
So
of a woman thing, though. Women like to get together and gab rather than work out, right?
Watch yourself, Bruce.
Multitask. That's a female thing.
So there is something to working out in a group, which
Yeah.
a lot of us just don't do. Some of us just don't work out. Some of us don't work out in groups. And there are reasons for and against that, right? But CrossFit is built around you are doing this together. There's another thing about CrossFit that certainly my gym doesn't do. I don't have a gym. But one thing, this is sort of the other thing about CrossFit is, as Casper said, how can you tell somebody who goes to CrossFit? They'll tell you.
Yeah. I graduated from Harvard.
That's right.
I
It is a very intense workout program.
Oh.
It is, the workouts are exceptionally intense. And so you're not just doing something together, but you're doing something together that is very difficult. And so there's a piece of that I think is similar actually to the appeal of the dinner party. Remember, the dinner party is not just people having a dinner party, right? Dinner party, as they were describing, is a program of getting together specifically about what?
Remembrance of a deceased person. Yeah.
You're getting together specifically about loss, which means you have permission in that setting to go deep, because you're finally in that setting where you can say, oh yeah, the reason I don't go home for Thanksgiving is because my mom died. And you're no longer the only person in the room who's had that experience.
It's a support group.
It's a support group. And it is, as y'all have described, very much something that we all have also gotten from life in a church. To have a group of people that that knows the things about us that mean that we can be a little bit more honest.
Nathan, do you think CrossFitters get the same fulfillment that we do, that the older generation does in the brick and mortar and structure. I mean, there really is a family feeling at church, at Covenant. And I think CrossFit might be trying to put that together, but like Casper said, or maybe it was Angie, that there's all these little pieces that all of a sudden it's not bringing everybody together at the same level. It'll meet some of their things, but no, not all of them.
What I heard was that, yes, in fact, people are finding deep meaning in their participation in CrossFit and in the community that is built there. And then what they talked about at the end was the burden on leaders in these communities that are not explicitly religious, but that are entering into the same kind of, being dragged into the same kind of work that religious leaders have training for, right? Casper and Angie and I all have the same degree from the same school. We all are trained for specific kinds of religious leadership, which you're not necessarily trained for as a SoulCycle instructor or a CrossFit box owner. So
that was something that was something I noticed too. Angie brought that out explicitly, like I don't know if it was a cycle instructor or whatever who got a phone call from somebody who wanted to know if she should divorce her husband. These people are being asked questions and called upon to try to give some advice and some support when they, as Angie said, they haven't been trained. They don't know how to do that.
Right. And that's a hard enough question to engage with somebody when you have been trained.
Yeah.
And that is sort of explicitly the level on which you're supposed to interact with folks. I know that from personal experience, that the hard work is hard even when you have the training and the support systems for it. So there's something very, much more. Their job is more difficult than mine because I at least have sort of training and an explicit context for doing it.
And probably some resources to call upon that these other people have no knowledge of.
Right. Bruce.
Nathan, you say you don't work out, but you went to Harvard and you are CrossFit.
Is that good? Is that good?
Our son Bill, when Scott died and he was back here, he and Ron had moved to Rochester in January of '94, and Scott died in July. And they had looked around in Rochester. I mean, they'd attended, I don't know how much, but they had gone to First Presbyterian in Rochester, and they weren't too comfortable there. And he said, after they were here, he said, they realized what they were looking for was a church that was more like Covenant. And then, so they had started attending a church that was just being formed, and now they're charter members of Community Presbyterian.
Oh, nice.
Did they have language for what they were looking for that was more like Covenant?
It was
I think the caring, the
Okay.
community that they weren't finding in the, and maybe the more casual that they weren't finding in the downtown Presbyterian church, probably where all the ushers were men and they wore their suits every Sunday. And
so the more casual and the more caring felt.
yes.
That community piece.
Community.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
community.
Greg in Kirksville. Yeah, that's what they were looking for, and they found it in the First Presbyterian Church that is withering, but what's left is a caring community.
Right.
Our
Yeah, go ahead.
Our boys did not go to church when they were in college, and I was concerned about that. But after they graduated and started families, they've
Even before that.
they've been very participating members. Yeah, they're all session members, and have been very active in participating and helping to lead things. So I'm quite pleased.
Good.
It's interesting that they have a first Presbyterian church and probably a second and a third. And it's like you'll find something that fits you. I went to school in Central at Pella. They have a first Reform, second Reform, third Reform, fourth Reform. Grand Rapids has over 100 Reformed churches, first, second, third, fourth, and eventually you're going to find one that fits you. It's weird.
So, so the other thing that I feel like I noticed, and that I noticed in the conversation in the video, specifically since we're specifically talking about millennials, but you know, that I certainly also notice in Presbyterian congregations is that we're often talking about one generation at a time. And this is not completely universally true, for instance, of CrossFit, but it's a much younger demographic doing the very intense full body functional fitness workout. You know, some of that is just because of who's able to do that kind of physical work. It's those workouts are work.
Arthritis hasn't kicked in
The
yet.
arthritis hasn't kicked in, yeah. But we have a similar situation in, again, white American religion, and I'm not even limiting that to Christianity. That our religious communities are increasingly sort of generation segregated as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a piece of what what they were identifying at the end of what are folks needing, what are folks looking for, that the leaders in these, again, nominally secular spiritual communities, the leaders are recognizing that they don't have mentors. They don't have elders in the demographic chronological kind of sense. People who have been around this block enough times to be able to offer that kind of counsel. And again, this turns into an advertisement for Casper and Angie's work in the what's their thing called, in the Sacred Design Lab, and they have another initiative called the Formation Project, really looking at how do we resource these leaders, how do we give these leaders the kinds of mentorship and length of experience that we have in religious communities. They have another example that is just super cool. That's called Nuns and Nuns. Nuns, N-U-N, and Nuns, N-O-N-E-S. So none, that none is the non-religious. I'm none of the above. And then nuns, of course, are Catholic sisters. And these two communities came into sort of cross-pollination. I believe it was in political advocacy, but I can't remember for certain. And so these groups came into this relationship and said, man, we ought to spend time together, because of course, you know, no one's dying off faster than Catholic religious sisters, except for Catholic religious brothers, right? And so the demographics are really not on their side for those celibate orders. And at the same time, they said, we've got these amazing traditions, and these people over here who are doing work we already resonate with really would like some of what we've got. And so you've got these communities that have formed between an explicitly religious community and a nominally secular community, but that said, you know, maybe we could just enjoy each other and get to know each other and be, you know, be a mutual support for each other. And so they're creating this whole new thing that kind of spread like wildfire, because you've got all these folks who are interested in what nuns have to offer. Russ, go ahead.
And besides helping each other, they're also helping others outside the group too. That's kind of, if I understand right, that's part of what brought them together.
Right. Yeah, that their group matters to people outside themselves. Yeah.
Are there any of these organizations, the Nuns to Nuns? Is that what they call it?
Nuns and nuns. Yeah.
Nuns and nuns. And are there any in this area?
Oh, good question. I don't know the answer to that.
No, there are none.
I'll check with the Hagedorns. They'll know.
There you go.
Thank you. But it is nationwide.
Yeah, and it's a very sort of loosely, you know, a loose network of ideas. But I don't know if there's anybody sort of. I don't know that there's a ship to steer, so I'm not sure anybody's steering the ship. But
that's okay too for a formation beginning, right?
That's right. It's an idea that, you know, it's a, you know, memes, right? Like nobody has to be in charge of where the meme goes. It just happens. So tell your sister she might be a meme.
Yeah, I will. She'll get a hoot out of that. Thank you.
I found it.
But I see that in her a lot.
I found it interesting with their 3 B words: becoming, belonging, and beyond. We all want to belong somewhere where we're comfortable, and then hopefully take that beyond. And then there's another B word that all has to do with believing. You have to believe where you're headed and what you settle for and what your goals are. So it's all these B words are kind of connected.
They are indeed, aren't they?
Good for you.
That's the most serious I've heard Bruce in a long time.
You know, he can be that way, and it's very enlightening. He's very good at it.
Oh my.
See? But he always usually will make a joke first.
Want to jump in here. I don't know where this fits in. I had a convenience store for about 9 years, way before cell phones were popular. See, this is an era where this whole cell phone thing is screwing up a lot of these millennials. But anyway, make a long story long, I always had problem with loitering. And convenience store has a state association. And I remember one of the speakers at one of these annual conventions says, well, you know why you've got so much problem with loitering? There's a lot of lonely people and they identify with your clerk. And I'm bragging here, but I had friendly clerks. And they would come and get a pack of cigarettes, maybe an hour and a half later, get $5 in gasoline and come back and get a pop. Where I would, do all my buying at one stop, but it never dawned on me. Some of these people's lives, they were so lonely that a friendly word from one of my clerks, and maybe from me, was the lure of they could go there and have some positive strokes that, I didn't know what they were doing with the other 23 hours of their day, but it was probably a pretty lonesome existence. And they said, you will never solve that problem because there are so many lonely people who will just, and they may not even realize, well, yeah, they do. They could have bought their cigarettes and their gasoline and their pop at the same at one time, but they didn't have any problem coming back. And I think that these people that we're talking about here have substituted this handheld device being their primary contact with the rest of the world. And it's kind of like sleeping with a checkbook. I don't care what your net worth is. That old checkbook isn't going to do you any good. And I don't care what that handheld phone does for you. You've got to face up to the need, and as we've experienced the last 10 months, for some relationships, maybe from a casual convenience store clerk all the way to our best friend who happens to maybe attend the same church we do, and everything in between. And until some of these people, it's right in front of them and they're still missing while they're unhappy and they're searching for something, but they don't know what it is. And it's just the way we're wired. It's no mystery why a lot of these people are unhappy, but they're not smart enough to, and they're also instant gratification. They won't let a relationship give it time to develop. So some of these churches that have a rock band and you go out there and man, you come out after that service and you've kind of got, it's kind of like I've got my fix. I've been elated by this atmosphere as opposed to our method of worship. It's the investment. They're not willing to invest in these rewarding relationships and how you get that message. And I got 3 kids. None of them are attending church. They're married. Holiday, what they call them, the Christmas and Easter, maybe.
Now remember
In the Lily Club.
Now remember what what Casper and Angie are studying, though. They are studying primarily in-person, high intensity, high demand community gatherings. So and the work that it takes to be part of a community, that you're very right to describe the amount of work that it takes in order to stick it out and build community and really have those relationships. They went looking for, okay, what are people up to? And they found these contexts where people are in fact building those relationships. A lot of day-to-day life is now mediated through that phone that people are never more than arm's reach away from. But those communities and relationships that are first maybe networked on the phone, if you get a chance to be in person with somebody, you're going to take it. And so I think you're spot on as far as identifying the need that folks have and are working on meeting with these groups. But again, remember, these are settings that are hard. These are settings where it is expected that you will talk about the fact that your parents have died and you are on your own in the world much younger than you ever expected, or where you're going to, sweat and cry and possibly wet yourself as you do this workout routine so that you can be part of this group. You know, is that theological? I think, you know, John asks a fair question. But we are talking here about communities that are work and relationships that are work. And you're right that we're talking about these communities that that are happening in, you know, in the context of people who, you know, maybe don't either have a positive experience with a religious community, don't know where to find a religious community, have tried religious communities, and we're not always as welcoming to people who aren't us as we are to people who are us, or who have been kicked out of religious communities, which is a whole other, you know, that's a whole other dynamic, especially for the millennial generation, because the cultural norms have shifted faster than the religious norms have kept up with them. But yeah, I think you're right though, Warren. People are looking for community, and community that matters.
As those
There you go.
millennials get older, they're not going to be able to do CrossFit. That, you know, what will become of them? I mean,
What will
how
happen
will
next
they,
for them? Yeah.
I mean, will their groups stay together? You know, with a church, you grow as a little kid all the way through. You know, it's still there even when you're in your 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. CrossFit will come and go, I think.
One of the things that Laura does for us at Covenant is when you're there on Wednesday night, she greets every person that walks in. And Nathan, you do the same, but she also is Facebook friends with them. She emails them, they text each other, and they come to church, not every Sunday, but when they're needed, when something's going on, when there's an event that helps them know what's going to happen, they're there. And some of those people, not all of them have become members, but the opportunity is there. And as their lives change and their kids grow, hopefully that'll continue to change Covenant as well, as we have so many more millennial people in that age group of, I think you said 25 to 40,
Yeah.
Nathan? Yeah, that are not doing church the way many of us do it, but they're doing church. And I'm sure that they say Covenant is their church, even though they're coming to events instead of the actual church service. And I don't know if they're doing the online worship or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I expect some are and some aren't. And I do know of at least a small handful of folks who are online with us every Sunday. You almost never see them in the pews, but that online setting gives them the chance to be at their church.
And are they watching it in their own time frame? Do they replay the service?
Yeah, and so what we're talking about here is that
you know
thing
how
that
many do that?
I don't know a number off the top of my head. Yeah, but what we're talking about here is that thing that Casper was talking about, unbundling. So, so if you get your sports news and your political news and your weather all from the same media source, you're not a millennial.
No.
You're probably pretty rare among y'all.
Opinion.
Because this unbundling thing has happened more and more. But what Deb's talking about, being at Covenant on Wednesday night with the kids, and some of them are just not in a congregation on a Sunday morning. Some of them are actually in a different congregation on a Sunday morning, or participate in a Bible study over here with a different church, or this is one of those new transitions that makes it really hard for us to count members. And maybe counting members, you know, in that conventional, you know, are you part of this club or not fashion is not actually a meaningful way to keep track of who's involved. But as Deb says, there are other contexts for this ministry. So an example is Sarah Trone Garriott, who is the coordinator of interfaith relations at DMARC. She posted on Facebook after Palm Sunday, whoa, like 2 or 3 different congregations gave her kids palms because they come to Covenant on Wednesday nights and they are connected to another non-Presbyterian congregation. She's actually a Lutheran minister, and a Lutheran congregation is part of their home, but not their only home. You know, and then of course, you know, her job drags her kids over to, you know, every different religious festival that happens around town, which is also fun. But she posted, you know, these are her congregations in the plural, because all of these congregations have said, yeah, we're going to take ownership in your life, even though you're only here. And there's no even though in the sentence really, but we're going to take ownership in your life, even though you're only here for a piece of what we do. So you're not necessarily buying the whole package. You're part of this piece of it. So that's a part of this.
I don't remember the family's name, but sometime in the last couple of years, we had a young couple with a baby that wanted to baptize their child, but weren't members at Covenant. And Session was asked, what do we do? Do we do this? And I think we agreed, yes, do it. But in my mind at that time, I thought we have to start stretching those boundaries. So we baptize your baby and know we're not going to see the baby every week, and we aren't really going to fulfill the literal obligation of raising your child in faith. But when they need us, they're going to come back. So we're going to be there for them in a different way. And if we see that child with the parents outside of church, we're all going to greet them and say hello. And so we just have to start expanding the boundaries of what we think literally our church is. And I think we've discovered that with the pandemic. It's not the building. It's all of us being out there in Zoom meetings and trying to make ourselves available. So what do we do with this information as Covenant? You know, we know why our numbers aren't increasing, but we sure have a lot of members that are not members. And you really see that on Wednesday night.
I think
Bev, you are muted.
I was just going to say, I think one of the big impediments for churches in general and Covenant specifically is the fact that the thing I hear, and this isn't just from Covenant people, this is from our generation, is that, well, I don't think we're ever going to get back to normal. I don't think we're ever going to get back to what it was. I think we need to look the other direction as to saying we need a new concept, because a lot of us get very judgmental and don't want to change and don't want to come up with some new ideas that will incorporate or include some of the younger people and what it is that they expect. So when we all go to church and somebody shows up in gym shoes, and then there's all these whispers below, it's like, how dare you come in gym shoes? I just find that being in the position that I'm in, that's the big concept is like, well, we're not going to go back to when we were the way church was, but we need to be open enough to see what church should be. But I think trying to get the rest of our generation to look at it with an open mind and say, well, you know, maybe a contemporary service or incorporating some of the contemporary into the traditional isn't that bad.
Go ahead, Bev.
I agree.
Well, I was just thinking the group who finds comfort at a brick and mortar sometimes, not all the time, they're not on the list, but maybe they're paying dues to CrossFit. What happens with the same kind of situation of a community that some of them do support the brick and mortar? And how do you make up for the loss of revenue that happens when, I mean, that's also part of being a community. Whether it's a gym, whether it's a church, there still is something there. Oh, what you got, Nathan? Sacred Design Lab. They need
So
all
this is where we paused the presentation,
financial.
and so Casper and Angie were talking to the leaders of these nominally secular spiritual communities, and said, here's what these leaders need. And everything we've described, millennials in general, or human beings in general, to be looking for, is actually what the leaders are looking for too. So not to be alone, companionship, partnership in this. That training and authorization in the instance of the leaders, that is, somebody who's, that they can know that they've actually got the capacity to do the things that they need to do. You could call that tradition. You can call that tradition, right? That we're standing in something that is deeper than us, bigger than us. Mentors and elders, that's the nuns with the nuns. The church being there for the kids who are not with us all the time, but are with us, and we claim them, we own them. Water from the well, they say that's, they just need sustenance and nourishment. And then where we landed, financial models that work. They said this is actually part of what makes CrossFit functional, is that people will pay for exercise classes. And so people will pay for this. They don't have to figure out, how to overhaul the pipe organ, because people will pay for that. Not to overhaul the pipe organ, but people will pay for membership in CrossFit. So this sort of subscriptionless model that churches have had, which is not the only way churches have ever worked. It's actually a fairly new financial model in Christian history. That this free will donation model maybe is not the only financial model out there. So the piece that the pieces that really sort of are my takeaways from learning this about what are folks looking for. The takeaways that I really am taking from this are that folks need community. Folks want to be challenged. They want to be part of something that not only matters because it's bigger than them, but it matters that they participate. They want those relationships with somebody who can actually help them kind of navigate the world that is weird and strange and different. And every new age one gets to is new and strange and different. We're all the oldest we've ever been. We've all we have all faced more challenges than we have ever faced before. And not just because there's a pandemic on, right? But because the stuff that you dealt with today, the things that you had to figure out today, you haven't figured those out before. And maybe somebody else that you actually have a mentoring relationship with maybe has. are we looking outside ourselves as a church to build those mentoring relationships, to invite, like explicitly invite folk into community? Are we, you know, and some of the answers to these at Covenant are yes. And so the question is, how do we? You know, are we looking beyond ourselves for, you know, making a difference and inviting people to make a difference with us? I could talk all day about tradition and the sort of creative ways that people want to claim tradition, because people don't want something that doesn't look traditional, but they want to do that traditional thing differently. It's a very interesting dynamic. So so these are some of the directions that that I'm seeing, and partly drawing from what folks like Casper and Angie, who have, you know, all of their attention focused on this. I'm seeing directions that that religion is headed.